What is up, YouTube? It is Doc here, Docky Style Gaming, and I am back at it again with another GodFall video for you all today. And boy, is this video probably one that I honestly wasn't planning on making because I was working on so many other build videos, but I started messing around with Bulwark and I was like, I have to show off this build. It's literally the best of everything in one Valorplate. Like, I didn't think I could pull it off, but I managed to pull it off. So if you want to deal increased breach damage, increased soul shatter damage, increased bleed damage, and have really good survivability, this is definitely going to be the build. And I'm just going to say it's probably one of the best Bulwark builds in the game. People might be like, but what about consuming? Get out of here. We're not talking about consuming right now. We're just talking about a flat out balanced beast of a build. It can do literally everything you want it to. There's no downsides to this build and it's ridiculous. So without wasting any more of y'all's time, like I always say, let's hop straight into this build video because I am like super hyped to show this off. So like always, let's start with taking a brief look at the attributes. Now everything is actually pretty decent stat wise, so let's go over each one of them. So our might is sitting at 2200, our spirit is at 2242, and our vitality is at 3362. Now you're gonna want your might to be the lowest on this build, and I'll get to why. Now, primary DPS is sitting at 2000, secondary DPS is at 1700, and the max health is at 4705. Now, like I always say, don't let these DPS numbers fool you because technically you will be dealing much more damage than what the DPS stats are actually showing. Now, our crit chance is almost pushing 60, which is killer for this build that has just about everything. Crit damage is at 138, and our soul shatter buildup is already at almost 300%. It's at 299.8. It's pretty much 300% soul shatter buildup. Now, we'll take a quick look at the detailed stats, and we can see our breach damage is pretty much sitting at 200% as well. We go to even look at our lifestone. Our lifestone is almost healing us for half of our health. So whenever you lose any health, popping a lifestone once will pretty much heal you instantly if you need to do that. Our spirit damage bonus is hella high on just about everything. When we go take a quick look at our takedowns, our spirit damage is sitting at pretty much 1800. But all in all, the detailed stats, like I said, everything is either extremely balanced or way better than normal. Now, again, Soul Shatter is pretty much at 300% with Breach being at 200. Now, what's dope about this setup is that you are consistently either breaching or soul shattering enemies within like 3 to 4 hits, maybe even less. So if you're not doing a takedown from breaching, you're either going to be doing some explosions from soul shatter. It's ridiculous how OP this build is. Now, before we take a quick look at all the gear, we're going to take a look at all of the skills. So we have our weapon techniques at maxed for this build, and then I did change some stuff around, maxing out all of my stats for might, spirit, and vitality. So those stats are all maxed out for this build. We also have our breach damage maxed out. We have our crit and crit chance maxed out, of course. Our takedowns are maxed out, and soul shatter is at 4. Now, if you can, I try to get it to 5, but I don't mind this build for my own personal gameplay. Now, when it comes to ascension levels, like I always say, ascension levels aren't too critical until you get to 375, because that's when you get all the big boy stats. So this is pretty much what I'm rocking right now, and then the ascension powers that I have for this build. But again, once you hit 375, that's when you start speccing into some of the big boy stats. So now let's take a look at all of the equipment that we have and all of the augments for this build. So for our primary weapon, we have the Sword of Archons, the legendary cursed longsword. It gives you plus 247% soul shatter buildup if you have less might than any other attribute, which again is why this build does have less might. Granted, barely, literally by 42, but because it has a less might, we're getting that additional 200 and pretty much 50 soul shatter buildup, bringing our soul shatter buildup damage to, again, 300%. Every hit is pretty much going to soul shatter an enemy to death or make their bar almost completely full, and then you just poke them once with a heavy attack and they explode. Next, we have the Eye of the Unknown, which is an Ascended Towers of Trials exclusive greatsword, which gives you the dual primaries. This one I have increased breach damage during Rampage and some additional Archon Fury charge whenever you defeat an enemy with a takedown. Now, a god roll version of this, personally, would be if you could get the stats where you could get additional overhealth whenever you soul shatter an enemy and the increased breach damage during Rampage. But I have yet to get lucky and get that, so this one will do for now. Now, when it comes to the amulets, we have the Earthminder's Crest, which will give you increased breach damage if you have more vitality than any other attribute, which again, we clearly do, thus helping us increase our breach damage even further. Now, this item can drop as a primal, meaning you can get your breach damage higher than what I even have already. And if you get lucky and have some increased breach damage secondaries like I do, again, your breach damage can be way higher than what I already have. Next, we have the Lion Talisman, which whenever you perform a crit hit, you gain weapon tech charge speed, which is something you're going to want to do because it will help you build up soul shatter and breach super fast because you can spam your weapon techs. Next, we have the Eye of the Dragon, which whenever you defeat an element inflicted enemy, you gain overhealth and have overhealth retention, and weapon techniques can inflict elements. Well, because this build is a bleed based build and Bulwark being a bleed based Valorplate, you'll pretty much always be proccing bleed, but when we get into the augments, you'll be seeing you're going to be dealing even more bleed damage than normal. So this is a good one to have on just about any build if we're being real, just for some extra survivability. And if you're like me and can get some that have extra breach damage for this build or even overhealth retention, it's also really good as well. I've noticed that my overhealth takes forever to drain with this build. So again, it helps increase its survivability a lot more than normal. Now, moving on to the second ring, we have the Weird Ring, which again is a cursed item that can come from the Lightbringer game mode. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this drops as in the blue rarity, but the primary stat is 100% of your breach damage bonus also increases the damage to boss enemies. And the secondary stats I got on here are very good. It's increased damage to breached enemies and increased physical damage as well. So again, whether you're just breaching them and dealing damage that way, you're going to be dealing more damage, or whenever you're hitting them with a weapon tech, you're going to be dealing even more damage to breached enemies and dealing bleed procs. And when we get into augments, you'll be realizing your bleed procs are even going to be doing more damage than normal as well. When it comes to the Life Stone, we have the Cosmic Aether Stone, which is for increasing your Archon Fury charge speed and damage. And of course, secondary stats are some increased crit and increased breach damage, of course. You're going to always want to be able to try and pop your Archon Fury charge if you can help it, dealing increased bleed damage and procs to multiple enemies, and whenever you defeat those enemies, you'll be able to get some extra health as well. Now lastly, by no surprise, is the Mace's Banderole for the Legendary Banner. Now this drops as a purple, but you have to upgrade it to Legendary, and it can drop as a primal as well, but this essentially gives you increased crit chance and increased crit damage. So that's the pieces of gear in a nutshell when it comes to this build. There are some other substitutes like I mentioned for the weapons that you can use, but there's also one for the amulet as well if you want to deal some additional breach damage. Now personally, I don't like to use this one because it's on a cooldown in comparison to the Earthminder's Crest, which has no cooldown, but it does let you mess around with your build a little bit more because there isn't that additional have to have more vitality than any other attribute. But that other item that you can substitute if you want to is the Pennant of the Four Winds amulet. Now this gives you 114 increased breach damage to full health enemies. Now again, the only downside, you have a 30-second cooldown. So you'll only be able to do this to 1, full health enemies, and 2, every 30 seconds. So personally, I'd rather take the just flat out breach damage from Earthminder's Crest, including the additional secondaries I have on well, pretty much bring me to like 121, I want to say, increased breach damage, which is still higher than the Pennant of the Four Winds. And if I was to get an Earthminder's Crest in a primal variant, it'd be even higher than that. So if you want to, you can use the Pennant of the Four Winds, but personally, I prefer the Earthminder's Crest. Now, moving over to the augments is where everything gets kind of interesting, and we can take a look at how we're going to be doing much more damage to breached enemies and increase bleed damage as well. So let's start with the first one, and we have Rubicon, which is a cursed item that you can only get from Lightbringer game mode, and this gives you increased breach damage if you have 3,000 or more vitality, which again in our attributes we do. Secondary stats I got on here are very good, so if you can get it with that, I'd try to get it with that. Vitality augments do have the chance to drop secondary stats that have increased damage to breach enemies. The next augment we have is Paradise, of course, which is weapon tech charge speed whenever you perform a crit hit. And because our crit hit is sitting at almost 60%, you'll be able to hit them pretty often and recharge your weapon. Again, recharging your weapon increases the amount of damage you deal, procs bleed procs, and builds up your soul shatter and breach damage hella fast. For our legendary item that we have the Primal Void Shell, which whenever you perform a crit hit, you gain overhealth for every 20 adjacent might augment, which in this case, we're getting an additional 144 overhealth whenever we perform a crit hit, which again, over 60%, so you'll be able to sustain your survivability pretty well. Next, we have Ironheart, which is just for some flat out increased crit chance. Now also, you want to have both of these augments in this position just so they can feed into Void Shell, because it needs to have might feeding into both of them. Now, if you want to, you could get even more out of Void Shell if Divine Conduit had might on it, but because I'm trying to keep my might down for some of my gear, that's the main reason why I don't have it on here. But once you start getting your Ascension levels higher, like I said, to 375, and start speccing into other skill trees properly, that won't be too big of an issue. But speaking of, we have Divine Conduit. Whenever you are hit, you gain 50% charge speed for 10 seconds. Next, we have Hypnotize, which restores your health whenever you place a banner, which is nice for just some additional survivability. And our second legendary augment that we have is Iron Bond. Now, this is a primal, meaning it comes from Ascended Towers of Trials, but it gives you an additional 122% breach damage to bleeding enemies. Again, this is Bulwark, and it's super easy to proc bleed, and because you're proccing a whole lot of breach damage and proccing a whole lot of bleeds, this augment is essential for dealing massive damage with Bulwark. And again, because it's a vitality augment, I could get for my masterwork stat increased damage to breach enemy. Now, the last augment we have is the warp augment, which applies stasis to nearby enemies whenever you use a life stone. Now, this isn't something you necessarily need, but I was trying to keep my spirit higher than my might, and it doesn't hurt to freeze some nearby enemies whenever you use your life stone. And considering that your life stone will pretty much heal you to max as long as you're not under 50% of your health, this is also a really good one for survivability, but also for crowd controlling a couple enemies and freezing them before they can deal any more damage to you while you heal up. Now, typically I'd be like, these are some of the augments that you can switch out for this build, but personally, I wouldn't switch out anything. I mean, again, it is your build, so you can if you want to, but for me personally, I feel like this build is perfect the way it is, where it is. Now, again, if you do change it, let me know in the comment section and let me know if it actually helped. But again, for me, I don't recommend switching up anything when it comes to the augments, because again, this build is perfectly balanced in every sense, whether it's doing massive damage, doing massive breach damage, doing massive soul shatter, doing increased bleed procs, having killer survivability, great overhealth retention. It's like nothing is bad with this build. It's insane. Like, just messing around with it, I'm just like, holy crap. Why isn't anybody else playing Bulwark like this? I know a lot of people are just like, yeah, let's just spec into massive bleed because bleed is an incredible proc in this game. Or let's do consume bleed builds because it's massive burst damage in this game. But in terms of a balanced, well-rounded build in every category, I feel like this build is the way to go, and honestly more fun in my opinion. People play Bulwark for bleed procs, people play Greyhawk for soul shatter, or Armistice for breach. Well, this one is like 2 additional Valorplates on top of Bulwark in one. So again, this build for me personally, I dig it. It's literally like having 3 Valorplates in 1 Valorplate. So I recommend everybody trying out this build and letting me know how fun it is and how far it's gotten you and the Ascended Towers of Trials. I literally, after I finished building it, leveling up all my cursed items, took it to Ascended Towers of Trials, got to floor 30 with ease without losing a single life solo. It was insane. Like, I was posting about it in my Discord because I was so hyped with how killer this build was. But that's all I got. Like I said, I know I'm extremely hyped about this build because I was super surprised by it. So again, let me know if you try out this build, or let me know how it does for you. And if you do change anything, let me know as well, because I'm curious to see if you can make this build even better than what it already is. Other than that, I am going to wrap up this video, so be sure to join the Discord if you haven't. Links to that is in the video description like always. And be sure to follow me on my Twitch because I stream every Tuesdays and Fridays, and sometimes I'll stream other days as well, but my guaranteed stream days are Tuesdays and Fridays, which means there will be a stream tonight. So if you haven't followed my Twitch, link to that is in the description as well. Other than that, I am going to catch you all on the next one, guys. Thank you all for watching. Like always, I'm out of here. Thanks for the love. Thanks for the subs. Peace.